Pierre, I'm afraid we must part ways. I can't take any of you to Claudia's house.
I didn't see which way they went. There could be any number of places they took.
Something in the latest The Chosen Season 6 behind-the-scenes footage changes the way we should look at the Passion completely. We are not just seeing Roman soldiers, a cross, or a few dark moments in the background. We are seeing footage that appears to confirm one of the most shocking character connections yet. Quintus is directly involved in the scourging of Jesus. And the deeper you look at this footage, the more disturbing the Season 6 story becomes. Season 6 has always been expected to take The Chosen into its darkest and most emotionally difficult territory, because the story is finally approaching the Passion of Jesus. But these new behind-the-scenes scenes give us something much more powerful than a normal production update. They give us a glimpse at how the show is preparing to portray the violence, the Roman presence, Peter's attack on Malchus, the crucifixion, the crown of thorns, and the suffering that leads to the cross. The production footage itself makes it clear that the team is trying to protect the full impact of what viewers will eventually see. Some moments are deliberately difficult to show in complete detail because the filmmakers do not want to reveal exactly how Jesus will look during this part of the story before the finished episode reaches the audience. But one thing is becoming harder and harder to hide. Quintus appears to be deeply involved. And if that is true, then Season 6 may be giving one of the show's earliest characters a completely different role in the final chapter of Jesus' earthly story. For years, The Chosen has built its story around something very different from traditional biblical adaptations. Instead of rushing from one major biblical event to another, the series spent years allowing audiences to live alongside these characters. We watched Peter become a disciple. We watched Matthew leave behind his old life. We watched Mary Magdalene begin a completely different journey. We watched the apostles grow from uncertain followers into people who were increasingly willing to risk everything for Jesus. That long build-up is exactly what makes Season 6 different. The story is no longer simply about what Jesus is going to teach next. The audience already knows where the biblical story is heading. The emotional question is how these characters will respond when the events they have been building toward finally arrive. And the BTS footage gives us a frightening preview of that transition. The production team describes Season 6 as the most violent season they have ever filmed. That statement is important because The Chosen has generally avoided making violence the center of its storytelling. Earlier seasons contained moments of danger and brutality, but the series usually focused more heavily on the emotional consequences than on showing prolonged physical suffering. Season 4 changed that balance with major deaths and attacks. Season 5 pushed the intensity further, but Season 6 enters territory where the violence is inseparable from the story itself. The footage shows Roman soldiers surrounding the events. We see the preparation for Jesus' scourging. We see the cross. We see the Roman execution process. We see the crown of thorns. And we see characters we already know standing inside scenes that audiences have known about for centuries. But now those scenes are no longer distant stories. They are happening to characters we have spent years with. One of the earliest shocking moments shown in the BTS material involves Peter attacking Malchus. The footage appears to show Peter with his sword, while Malchus is down behind Jesus. The apostles move forward, the guards move forward, and Jesus intervenes. Another angle appears to show Jesus protecting Malchus after Peter's attack. Big James is also seen with his sword drawn. This matters because the scene is not being presented as an isolated biblical reference. It is being presented as part of the emotional collapse of the group. Peter is reacting, the guards are reacting, the apostles are reacting, and Jesus is standing in the middle of all of it. That is one of the defining patterns of the Passion story. Everyone around Jesus is acting according to fear, anger, duty, confusion, or desperation, while Jesus continues moving toward the outcome he already knows is coming. And then there is Malchus. The BTS material spends surprising attention on him. The actor playing Malchus explains that he had personally experienced a serious ear injury years before being cast in the role. The production then connects that strange, real-life coincidence to the biblical character whose ear is cut off by Peter and healed by Jesus. The series has also expanded Malchus far beyond the single famous moment audiences might remember from the Bible. According to the discussion in the footage, Malchus appears in additional parts of the story. including his connection to the courtyard where Peter later denies Jesus. That allows the Chosen to turn him from a brief biblical figure into a character with a larger emotional journey. And that creates another fascinating possibility. Malchus is not simply a soldier who witnesses a miracle. He is someone who is physically touched by the power of Jesus at the exact moment when everything around Jesus is collapsing. His ear is cut. Jesus heals him. And suddenly the man who came to participate in Jesus' arrest has personally experienced something he cannot easily explain away. The BTS discussion even describes Malchus as conflicted because things he had been told were lies or heresy are becoming things he has personally witnessed. That makes his presence during this period potentially much more meaningful than it first appears. But Malchus is not the only Roman-connected character whose role becomes increasingly important. Because when the footage moves toward Jesus' scourging, another familiar face appears: Quintus. And this is where the Season 6 BTS footage becomes genuinely shocking. The footage repeatedly focuses on a Roman soldier involved in the whipping sequence. At first, viewers could potentially argue that the identity was uncertain because several Roman soldiers and extras are present around the set. But then the camera gives audiences a much clearer look. The person participating in the scourging appears to be Brandon Potter as Quintus. The discussion in the footage goes even further, with the presenters repeatedly identifying him and eventually treating his involvement as confirmed. The footage shows Quintus apparently being directed during the whipping scene. That changes the emotional meaning of the sequence, because Quintus is not some random Roman soldier. He is a character the audience already knows. He has history, he has authority, and he has been part of the world of the Chosen since very early in the series. So imagine watching Jesus being prepared for the Passion and realizing that a familiar face from the earliest chapters of the show may be standing among the people physically carrying out the brutality. That is a very different experience from watching an anonymous Roman soldier. The audience knows who Quintus is. The audience has heard him speak. The audience understands his position. And now he appears to be standing on the opposite side of the scene from Jesus. That is what makes the moment so uncomfortable. The footage also gives us a look at the practical construction of the scourging scene. The team explains that the whips were designed with softer materials rather than being actual weapons, capable of seriously injuring the actor. They experimented with different materials, lengths, and construction methods to create something that could look convincing on camera while remaining controlled. But the interesting part is what happens after the physical action. Makeup, visual effects, sound, performance, camera angles, and practical effects all have to work together. The production explains that different areas of Jesus' body need to appear affected by the whipping. Some impacts happen outside the camera's direct view, while visual effects help reveal the injuries. Makeup must change as the scene progresses. Sound effects and Foley must make every movement feel heavier. In other words, the brutality viewers eventually see on screen is not simply one actor hitting another. It is an entire production designed to make the audience feel the escalation. And that is exactly why this footage matters. Because the goal is not merely to show violence. The goal is to make the audience emotionally understand what Jesus is enduring. And when you combine that with almost 10 years of emotional investment in these characters, the scene becomes something much more personal. The people watching are not meeting Jesus for the first time. They have watched him heal people. They have watched him laugh. They have watched him teach. They have watched the apostles follow him, and now they are going to watch him be beaten. That is where everything changes, because Season 6 is not simply showing the Passion. It is showing the Passion through the eyes of characters and viewers who have lived with Jesus for years. And the most disturbing question is still waiting. Why is Quintus there? The biggest hidden detail in this BTS footage may not actually be the violence. It may be the identity of the people surrounding Jesus. At first glance, the footage seems straightforward. Roman soldiers are present. Jesus is being prepared for scourging. The execution sequence is being filmed. The cross is surrounded by people. But once you slow down and examine the individual characters, the scene starts revealing a much larger story. The first major clue is Quintus. His involvement in the scourging is particularly significant because Quintus is not a character created simply for the Passion sequence. He has existed in the world of the Chosen from the beginning. That means his appearance here creates a bridge between the early seasons and the final stages of Jesus' ministry. The series has spent years showing Roman authority through characters rather than treating Rome as an invisible institution. Quintus represents that system. And now, if the BTS footage is showing what it appears to show, that system is directly confronting Jesus. This creates a potentially powerful emotional reversal. Earlier in the story, characters like Quintus could observe Jesus from a position of authority. They could hear rumors. They could investigate him. They could question what he was doing. But the Passion changes the relationship completely. Jesus is no longer standing in a crowd speaking to people. He is restrained. The soldiers are in control, and the Roman system is deciding what happens to him. That is why Quintus's presence matters. The hidden detail is not simply Quintus is in the scene. The hidden detail is what his presence says about the journey of the character. There is another important clue involving Malchus. The BTS material emphasizes that Malchus is being developed as a full character rather than being treated as a one-scene biblical extra. His role extends into other moments surrounding the arrest, and Peter's denial. That means Season 6 may be interested in showing how the same people who participate in Jesus' arrest are affected by what happens around them. Malchus physically experiences a miracle. Quintus, meanwhile, may be positioned much closer to the actual suffering of Jesus. These two characters could therefore represent two different responses to encountering Jesus. Malchus is wounded by one of Jesus' followers and healed by Jesus himself. Quintus appears to participate in the punishment of Jesus. The contrast is striking. One man is healed by Jesus. Another may be involved in hurting him. And both exist inside the same Roman-controlled world. Then there is Longinus. The BTS material identifies Longinus as another character who appears throughout the Season 6 material. Unlike some biblical characters, he is described in the discussion as a more traditional character rather than someone directly named in the biblical text in the same way as Peter or John. His apparent connection to the Crucifixion is another major clue. The footage suggests that the production is building a Roman execution structure around Jesus' death. The soldiers are not simply there as background decoration. Different characters appear to have different responsibilities. One figure is described as potentially being the person responsible for breaking the legs of the thieves on the other crosses and eventually piercing Jesus' side. That is important because the crucifixion sequence is being constructed as a complete event rather than as a single dramatic shot. There are soldiers, there are executioners, there are followers, there are women, there is John, there are Roman authorities, and there is Jesus at the center. The production footage also shows the crown of thorns being placed on Jesus. That moment may be one of the most psychologically powerful parts of the entire sequence. Because the crown is not simply an object, it is an act of mockery. The Roman soldiers are turning kingship into humiliation. And the BTS footage indicates that the production is treating this moment with serious attention. The same is true of the night shooting around the cross. The footage shows a large group of people surrounding the crucifixion during night filming. That aligns with the biblical account's description of darkness surrounding the crucifixion. Again, the show appears to be focusing on the atmosphere around the event, rather than simply placing Jesus on a cross and moving on. That atmosphere could become one of the defining visual elements of Season 6. Darkness, fire, Roman soldiers, the crowd, the women, John, the cross, and the silence that comes after violence. There is also another intriguing part of the footage involving babies and Roman-looking soldiers. The people discussing the footage suggest that this could potentially connect to the biblical account commonly known as the killing of the innocents, the massacre of children associated with Herod's attempt to eliminate the infant Jesus. But this is where we need to be careful. The footage itself does not definitively establish that this scene is the killing of the innocents. The presence of babies and soldiers makes the theory understandable, and the BTS discussion itself considers that possibility. But it also raises a historical question about whether Roman soldiers would have been the forces involved under Herod. The footage's own discussion acknowledges that uncertainty. So, This should remain a theory rather than a confirmed Season 6 plot point. And that uncertainty actually makes the footage more interesting, because it suggests the production may be connecting different periods of Jesus' story visually, or there may be another scene entirely that viewers have not yet understood. That is one of the biggest dangers of analyzing BTS footage. A costume can suggest a character, a location can suggest an event, a group of actors can suggest a scene, but until the finished episode is released, the full context remains unknown. And The Chosen appears to be intentionally protecting that context. The filmmakers specifically discuss not wanting to reveal everything. They want the audience to experience the finished scene without already knowing every detail. That means the footage we have seen is probably only a fraction of the full sequence. And perhaps the biggest hidden detail is the emotional purpose behind that secrecy. The production does not simply want to shock viewers, it wants viewers to experience the passion. There is a major difference. Shock disappears quickly. Emotion stays. If the finished sequence works as intended, viewers will not simply remember that Jesus was whipped. They will remember how they felt watching it happen. They will remember the Roman soldiers, they will remember the apostles, they will remember the people standing nearby, and they will remember the fact that these are characters they have known for years. That is the hidden power of Season 6. The violence is visible, but the emotional history underneath it is what could make the scene unforgettable. Now we reach the part where we have to separate what the footage actually confirms from what the footage could mean. The strongest confirmed takeaway from the material is that the production is filming an extremely intense depiction of Jesus' scourging and crucifixion, and the BTS footage clearly identifies Brandon Potter as Quintus participating in the whipping sequence. But what does that mean for Quintus? There are several possibilities. The first possibility is that Quintus is simply fulfilling his role as a Roman authority figure. If that is the case, his participation could be a reminder of how completely the Roman system has closed around Jesus. Quintus does not necessarily need to become a personal enemy of Jesus. He could simply be following orders. That interpretation would fit the Roman power structure shown throughout the series. And ironically, that could make the moment even darker. Because sometimes the most frightening form of cruelty is not personal hatred. It is obedience. A soldier does not necessarily need to hate the person in front of him. He only needs to believe that he is carrying out an order. The BTS footage even includes language around soldiers just following orders. That could become an important thematic idea in Season 6. The second possibility is that Quintus may have a more complicated emotional reaction. This is only a theory. The footage does not confirm exactly what Quintus feels during the scene. But because The Chosen has spent so much time developing him, it would be reasonable to wonder whether his presence during Jesus' suffering carries emotional weight for the character. Imagine Quintus having witnessed the growing influence of Jesus over the years. Imagine hearing reports of miracles. Imagine seeing the political tension surrounding him. And then imagine being placed in the position of participating in his punishment. That creates an enormous internal contradiction. The man standing in front of Quintus is not an anonymous prisoner. He is someone whose name has become impossible to ignore. And yet, Quintus is still a Roman official. That conflict could potentially become one of the most interesting parts of his Season 6 journey. Another possibility involves the relationship between Quintus and Atticus. The BTS footage mentions Atticus around the scourging sequence and repeatedly shows Roman characters together. If the show chooses to revisit the emotional differences between Roman characters, Season 6 could potentially use the Passion to reveal how different people inside the same system respond differently to Jesus. Some might see him as a threat, some might see him as a nuisance, some might see him as a political problem, and some might begin to suspect that something extraordinary is happening. Again, these are possibilities, not confirmed plot details. But the setup is there. Then there is Malchus. His story creates another fascinating prediction. Could Malchus's healing affect how he views Jesus during the events that follow? The BTS discussion describes Malchus as someone who is conflicted because things he had been told about Jesus do not match what he personally experiences. That could make his presence during the arrest and denial sequence emotionally significant. The audience knows something Malchus now knows firsthand. Jesus has the ability to heal. But Malchus is still surrounded by people who have come to arrest him. That contradiction could become devastating. There is also a possibility that the show will use Malchus as a bridge between Peter's failure and Jesus' mercy. Peter attacks him, Jesus heals him, Peter later denies Jesus. Jesus continues toward the cross. The irony is powerful. Peter is trying to protect Jesus through violence. Jesus responds to violence with healing. And that difference tells us everything about the kind of kingdom Jesus is bringing. Now consider the crucifixion itself. The BTS footage indicates that the production is investing heavily in practical effects, makeup, sound, visual effects, performance, and choreography. That suggests the final sequence could be much more immersive than earlier depictions. But immersion alone is not the most important factor. The bigger question is perspective. Whose eyes will we see the crucifixion through? Will we spend most of the time with Jesus? Will we see the apostles? Will we see Mary? Will we see John? Will we see Roman soldiers? Or will the show move between all of these perspectives? A multi-perspective approach could make the sequence especially powerful. Imagine seeing Peter realizing what is happening. Imagine John standing near the cross. Imagine the women watching from a distance. Imagine Roman soldiers treating the event as another execution. And imagine Quintus standing somewhere inside that machinery of death. That could make the crucifixion feel like the collision point of every storyline the series has spent years building. Another theory involves the darkness and night filming. The footage shows the production filming the crucifixion at night, and the discussion connects this with the biblical descriptions surrounding Jesus' death. This could mean the final sequence will deliberately move from physical brutality into a quieter, almost supernatural atmosphere. The violence could eventually give way to silence. The shouting could disappear. The crowd could become still. The Roman soldiers could suddenly seem small compared to the event happening around them. If the show chooses to build the sequence this way, the emotional impact could come not from making everything louder, but from suddenly making everything quieter. That contrast could be devastating. Then there is Longinus. The production's attention to him suggests that the Roman execution process will be given considerable narrative space. If he is indeed the character involved in the actions suggested by the BTS footage, his role could provide another Roman perspective on Jesus' death. Again, we should not assume the final character arc before the episode is released, but the fact that the production is giving him meaningful presence makes him worth watching. The same applies to the crown of thorns. It is possible that the crown sequence will function as more than simple physical humiliation. It could represent the moment when the Roman soldiers intentionally turn Jesus' identity into a joke. They mock a king by creating a crown from thorns. They mock power by giving him pain. And they mock authority while unknowingly participating in a scene that Christians understand as part of a much larger story. That dramatic irony could be central to the episode. The people around Jesus believe they are humiliating a defeated prisoner. The audience knows they are witnessing something they believe will change history. That gap between what the characters understand and what the audience understands is one of the strongest storytelling tools available to the chosen. And finally, there is the biggest theory of all. Could Season 6 use Quintus's presence during the scourging to complete a character journey that began almost a decade earlier? We cannot say yet. The footage does not reveal his complete story. It does not show his final reaction. It does not confirm what he believes. It does not confirm whether he changes. But it does confirm that the character is present at an extraordinary moment. And that alone is enough to make his Season 6 story one of the most interesting things to watch. Because if Quintus has spent years trying to understand Jesus from the outside, Season 6 may force him to confront Jesus from closer than ever before. And that could change everything. The biggest question now is what the finished Season 6 story does with everything we have seen. The BTS footage gives us the pieces, but the final episode will decide how those pieces fit together. The first major event we should expect is the continuation of the arrest sequence. Peter's sword attack on Malchus is clearly being filmed with significant attention. The footage shows Peter attacking, the guards moving forward, and Jesus protecting Malchus. This is likely to become one of the key moments where Peter's emotional state reaches a breaking point. Peter has always been one of the most passionate characters in the story. He is loyal, he is impulsive, he is willing to fight, But Jesus' response to his violence is completely different. Instead of allowing the situation to become a battle, Jesus protects the very man who came with the people arresting him. That moment could become even more powerful because viewers know what Peter is about to face emotionally. He believes he is defending Jesus, but Jesus is moving willingly toward his destiny. That difference could leave Peter devastated. Then comes the Roman punishment. The scourging footage is perhaps the clearest indication that the show intends to make this part of the story extremely difficult to watch. The production has designed the sequence carefully, with soft props, makeup effects, visual effects, sound design, and choreography all working together. That means viewers should expect the scene to feel physically intense without the production actually placing the actor in real danger. And the presence of Quintus makes the scene even more important. If the final cut confirms that Quintus is the Roman figure actively involved in Jesus' scourging, his character could become one of the emotional anchors of the sequence. Not necessarily because he suddenly becomes a believer, not necessarily because he changes sides, but because the audience knows him. That familiarity creates discomfort. Then the crown of thorns raises the stakes even further. The Roman soldiers do not simply punish Jesus, they mock him. That means the sequence moves from physical suffering to psychological humiliation. And after that comes the cross. The BTS footage shows the production preparing for a large crucifixion sequence with numerous people around the cross. This is where the years of storytelling could finally converge. John is there, the women are there, the Roman soldiers are there, Jesus is there. And the audience has been waiting for this moment for years. The production also appears to be filming the crucifixion at night, which could create a very different visual atmosphere from the earlier seasons. Darkness surrounding the cross, people standing silently, Roman soldiers working around the execution, the followers watching from a distance, and Jesus at the center. The emotional weight could become overwhelming. Then comes another potentially important event, the execution of the thieves. The BTS footage suggests that a Roman figure may be involved in breaking the legs of the men on the other crosses. If the final scene follows the biblical sequence, this could create a brutal contrast. The soldiers are treating the crucifixion as an execution procedure, but the audience understands the deeper meaning. The same Roman process that is happening to everyone else is unfolding around Jesus in a unique way. And eventually, the side of Jesus is pierced. The BTS material appears to prepare for that event as well. This means Season 6 could potentially spend considerable time showing the mechanics of the crucifixion rather than jumping over them. But the most important prediction is what happens emotionally after Jesus dies. Because the Passion is not simply about the physical suffering, it is about what happens to everyone who loved him. Peter, John, Mary, the other disciples, the women, and potentially even characters who once stood on the opposite side. That is where Quintus becomes especially interesting. If the show has intentionally brought him back for this period, then his presence may have a purpose beyond simply giving the Roman side continuity. The footage itself repeatedly emphasizes his involvement. So the question becomes, what does he do after witnessing Jesus' suffering? Does he remain exactly where he started? Does he become disturbed? Does he question what he has seen? Does he simply move on? We do not know. And the show has not confirmed that answer. But that uncertainty is exactly what makes the character worth watching. The same goes for Malchus. After being healed by Jesus, he is now part of a world where Jesus is being condemned. What happens when a man who personally experienced Jesus' healing sees that same person treated as a criminal? That could create one of the most emotionally complicated perspectives in the story. Then there is the possibility that the BTS footage showing babies connects to the earlier story of Jesus' childhood. Again, this remains unconfirmed. It could be the killing of the innocents, it could be another scene, it could be a flashback, it could connect to a larger storytelling structure that the audience cannot understand yet. But if the production is indeed revisiting the earliest days of Jesus' life while simultaneously approaching his death, that would create a powerful narrative circle. The story begins with a vulnerable child hunted by powerful forces. And decades later, the same world is surrounding him again. The difference is that now the audience knows who he is. That kind of parallel could be incredibly powerful if used carefully. There is another important factor. The filmmakers clearly know that audiences are watching these BTS videos closely. They are aware that fans will pause frames, they will identify costumes, they will recognize actors, they will compare locations, they will try to work out who is standing next to whom. And because of that, the production is careful about what it reveals. The footage itself acknowledges that they cannot show everything because they want to preserve the impact of Jesus' appearance during the Passion. That tells us something. There may be much more footage than the public has seen, and there may be important scenes deliberately kept hidden. So the safest prediction is that what we have seen is not the full picture. It is a carefully controlled glimpse, but even this glimpse tells us that Season 6 is going to be emotionally different from everything that came before. The story is no longer building towards something distant. The story is arriving at the moment everyone has been waiting for. The disciples are about to be tested. Roman authority is about to reach its most brutal point. Jesus is about to endure suffering. And the audience is about to watch characters they have known for years confront the darkest hours of their lives. That is why this season could become the most emotionally difficult chapter of The Chosen yet. Not simply because it is violent, but because we care about the people involved. And when the first strike of the scourging lands, the audience will know exactly how much history led to that moment. The question is not whether Season 6 will be painful. The BTS footage already tells us that it will be. The real question is how the show will make us feel when the cameras stop, the music fades, and we finally see the finished scene. Because after years of following Jesus, viewers will not be watching a stranger suffer. They will be watching someone they have spent years with. And that could make the Passion hit harder than ever before. Season 6 is clearly preparing for some of the most difficult scenes The Chosen has ever filmed. The scourging, the crown of thorns, the crucifixion, Peter's attack on Malchus, the Roman soldiers, and especially the apparent confirmation of Quintus's involvement all point toward a season unlike anything we have seen before. But there is still one question that refuses to go away. Why bring Quintus back into this story at this exact moment? Is he simply following Roman orders, or could his presence carry a deeper emotional purpose? And what do you think happens when he finally realizes exactly who he has been standing against? Let me know your theory in the comments. And if you think the Season 6 BTS footage is hiding an even bigger reveal, tell me what you noticed that everyone else might have missed. Because the closer we get to the Passion, the more it feels like The Chosen is preparing to turn almost 10 years of storytelling into one unforgettable final chapter.